Imagine a man who could predict the future, manipulate royalty, and survive poison, gunshots, and brutal beatings. Sounds like something straight out of a novel, right? But what if I told you this story is real? Grigori Rasputin, the mysterious monk of Imperial Russia, was much more than just an advisor to the Tsar. To some, he was a saint with divine powers. To others, a dangerous manipulator, a ruthless fraud. But one thing's for sure, he was impossible to ignore. How did a poor peasant from the frozen lands of Siberia rise to become the most influential man in the Russian Empire? How did he survive a brutal assassination? And even after his death, his prophecy wiped out a dynasty that ruled for over 300 years. And the most chilling question of all, did Rasputin ever really die? Or does his dark legacy still haunt history? The snow blanketed the vast, icy landscape of Siberia when in 1869, Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin was born. Just another ordinary boy? Not even close. From an early age, there was something different about him. His piercing gaze, his eerie ability to read people, and most of all, his strange gift for healing sick animals with just a touch made the locals uneasy. His hometown, Pokrovskoye, was a remote, brutally cold village where superstition was just as powerful as faith. Many believed Rasputin had a divine calling. Others thought he was cursed. Some say that as a child he had his first mystical vision, where a celestial being warned him about his great destiny. But Rasputin was no saint. As a young man, he gained a reputation for his wild behavior, heavy drinking, affairs with married women, even petty theft. But then something changed. After what he described as a series of divine experiences, he made a radical decision. He left home and never looked back. For years, Rasputin wandered from monastery to monastery, studying, fasting, and searching for enlightenment. He learned about hypnosis, healing prayers, and the power of words that seemed to work like magic. But unlike the other monks, he refused to follow the strict rules of the Orthodox Church. His radical belief, sin was necessary for purification. Some worshipped him, others feared him. When Rasputin returned to his village, he was a changed man. His name was whispered in both reverence and fear. He healed the sick, made chilling predictions, and gathered a following. His legend grew, and it was only a matter of time before rumors of his powers reached the halls of the Winter Palace. And just like that, the mystic peasant took his first step toward becoming the most dangerous man in Russia. By 1905, a dark shadow loomed over Russia. The Romanov Empire, which had ruled for over 300 years, was crumbling under the threat of revolution. Strikes, famine, and unrest spread like wildfire, but inside the grand halls of the Winter Palace, Empress Alexandra had only one concern: her son, the young Tsarevich Alexei. The boy suffered from a deadly, incurable disease, hemophilia. A single cut, a small bruise, either could be a death sentence for the heir to the throne. In her desperation to save him, the Empress clung to a strange rumor circulating among the aristocracy. A holy man from Siberia is coming. He can heal the boy. And that's how Grigori Rasputin was summoned to the imperial court. When the monk arrived at the palace, he was nothing like what you'd expect from a royal advisor. Tall, unkempt, dressed in simple peasant clothes with piercing, hypnotic eyes, Rasputin was both fascinating and unsettling. He didn't bow like the others. He wasn't intimidated by the disapproving glares of the nobility. But what happened next would forever change his place within the royal family. They say that after meeting young Alexei, Rasputin whispered a prayer and ordered the doctors to step back. The next morning, the boy's bleeding had stopped, something no one could explain. A miracle? Coincidence? Hypnosis? The truth was never proven, but to Empress Alexandra there was no doubt. Rasputin was a saint sent by God to save her family. From that day on, the fate of the empire silently fell into the hands of a Siberian peasant. But the rest of the imperial court was not thrilled with the monk's rise to power. Rasputin didn't just win the empress's heart, he also began influencing the political decisions of Tsar Nicholas II. Ministers feared him, the nobility despised him, the clergy saw him as a threat. The same question echoed through the luxurious halls of the aristocracy. Who was this man, really? A saint or a cunning manipulator? The game of power and deception had only just begun. But Rasputin wasn't just a mysterious healer. He claimed he could see the future, and as absurd as it sounded, some of his prophecies actually came true. Inside the golden corridors of the Winter Palace, the Siberian monk whispered secrets into Empress Alexandra's ear. He convinced her that Russia's fate was directly tied to his own. If he died, the Romanov dynasty would collapse. Stories of his clairvoyance spread like wildfire. He predicted assassinations, betrayals, and even the disaster that would wipe out the imperial family. But one of Rasputin's most chilling prophecies was written in a letter to Tsar Nicholas II. If I am killed by common men, you and your family will rule for many years. But if I am murdered by nobles, your bloodline will be destroyed. None of your children will survive. It sounded almost like a curse. The Tsar ignored it. But time would prove Rasputin was right. On top of that, reports say that Rasputin predicted the outbreak of World War I. He warned the Tsar and Tsarina that a bloody conflict was coming and that if Russia joined in, the empire would collapse. And that's exactly what happened. To his followers, these predictions were undeniable proof of his divine gift. To his enemies, they were nothing more than psychological tricks and manipulation. But as Rasputin's prophecies piled up, so did the hatred against him. To many, he had become the most dangerous man in Russia. And inside the luxurious palaces of St. Petersburg, the plot to eliminate him was already in motion. The problem? Rasputin seemed impossible to kill. His presence in the imperial court was already a scandal, but over time, the rumors about his behavior became even more disturbing. Rumors swirled that the Siberian monk, who presented himself as a holy man, was actually living a double life. He preached a twisted belief that sin was necessary for purification, a dangerous idea that blended religion with debauchery. He was known to drink heavily, attend lavish parties, and engage in affairs with high society women. Some even whispered that he had a secret relationship with Empress Alexandra. Images of Rasputin, drunk, surrounded by women, circulated among the nobility like a contagious disease. His name was spoken in hushed tones, sometimes in fear, sometimes in disgust, and for some, even in desire. At first, the press mocked him as nothing more than a fraud, a superstitious trickster. But soon, the narrative shifted. They began portraying him as the true ruler of Russia. Ministers and generals feared that the empress was under some kind of hypnotic trance, and that every decision made by Tsar Nicholas II somehow had Rasputin's fingerprints all over it. Meanwhile, the empire was falling apart. World War I was devastating the economy. The people were starving, revolts erupted in the streets, the monarchy was hanging by a thread. And yet, inside the Winter Palace, Rasputin was untouchable. The Tsar, convinced that the monk was a divine messenger, exiled or dismissed anyone who dared to criticize him. At this point, Rasputin was no longer just an advisor. He was the invisible emperor, pulling the strings of Russia from behind the curtain. That's when a group of nobles decided enough was enough. Rasputin had become a problem that could only be solved with blood. And so, a conspiracy was set in motion, a plot that would end in the most gruesome way imaginable. The streets of St. Petersburg were covered in snow that frigid night of December 16th, 1916. The cold cut through the air like a knife. But inside the Yusupov Palace, the tension was even thicker than the frost outside. A group of conspirators, led by Prince Felix Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and politician Vladimir Purishkevich were about to carry out one of the most infamous assassinations in Russian history. The plan was simple: lure Rasputin to the mansion, poison him, and dispose of the body. Rasputin arrived late at night, invited by Yusupov under the pretense of meeting his wife. He was relaxed, unaware, completely unsuspecting. He had no idea that this would be his last night alive. The poison didn't work. The conspirators served Rasputin poisoned wine and cakes laced with cyanide, enough to kill a man in minutes. But he didn't die. He laughed, chatted, drank more. He seemed completely unaffected. Something was wrong. Desperate, Yusupov pulled out a pistol and shot Rasputin at point-blank range. The monk collapsed onto the floor. The group celebrated. Finally, it was over. He was dead, or so they thought. Rasputin got back up. His wild eyes burned with rage, his face covered in blood. He screamed, lunged at Yusupov and tried to strangle him. Panic took over. The assassins fired more bullets. Rasputin fell again, but he was still breathing. Terrified that the monk just wouldn't die, the conspirators tied up his body, dragged him to a bridge, and threw him into the freezing Neva River. Days later, when Rasputin's corpse was finally recovered, the autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. He hadn't died from the poison. He hadn't died from the gunshots. He had drowned. Even after being poisoned, shot, and beaten nearly to death, Rasputin was still alive when he hit the icy water. And this only fueled the legend. Was he truly immortal? But there was something even more terrifying. Rasputin's prophecy came true. Just a few months after his death, the Russian Revolution exploded. Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, and the entire Romanov family was brutally executed. The Siberian monk's final curse had been fulfilled. And with that, the greatest mystery of Imperial Russia was born. The man who refused to die was finally dead. Or was he? Grigori Rasputin's death should have marked the end of his influence over Russia, but ironically it did the exact opposite. His assassination didn't prevent the collapse of the empire. If anything, it seemed to speed it up. Just 3 months later, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate. The Romanovs were captured, and in July 1918, they were brutally executed by the Bolsheviks. Rasputin's prophecy had come true with terrifying accuracy. But the story of the immortal monk didn't end there. Even after his death, the rumors of his supernatural powers only grew. Some claimed that when his body was exhumed, his eyes still looked alive. Others said his corpse twitched inside the funeral pyre, as if trying to rise from the flames. In the years that followed, Rasputin became more than a man. He became a myth. To some, he was a wronged saint, a visionary who foresaw Russia's destruction and tried to stop it. To others, a dangerous manipulator, a fraud who led the Romanovs to their doom. But what if Rasputin wasn't just a man? Some historians suggest that his unusual resistance could have scientific explanations. The cyanide may have broken down when mixed with the sugar from the cakes, making it ineffective. His strong, resilient body, combined with the freezing Russian winter, might have slowed down the effects of his injuries. But others prefer to believe something far darker, that Rasputin had a pact with forces beyond human understanding. After all, how did a simple peasant climb his way into the heart of the most powerful monarchy in the world? How did he predict the fall of the Romanovs with such terrifying precision? How did he survive so many assassination attempts before finally being silenced? Even today, his story remains shrouded in mystery. Rasputin became a dark legend, a symbol of mysticism, power, and the influence that one man can have over the fate of a nation. But one question still lingers. If Rasputin truly possessed powers beyond human comprehension, did he ever really leave? Grigori Rasputin's story proves that in times of crisis, people seek answers in mysterious and unexplainable figures. Maybe he was a holy man, maybe he was a fraud, or maybe he was something far worse. But one thing is certain, his influence outlived him. What did Rasputin truly represent? A final warning before the fall of the Romanovs, a man ahead of his time, or an enigma that will never be fully unraveled? One fact remains, his name was never forgotten, and perhaps that was his true immortality.